All right, welcome. For today's class, we're going to be painting a beautiful, simple floral painting. One of the themes that I have for the painting today is to leave some white space in between some of our objects. And in today's class, you could paint using watercolors or acrylics. It's absolutely up to you. I'll guide folks who are doing both along the way. I'm not sure how long tonight's class will take. Today's class, it might take, an hour, it might take an hour and a half. I don't think this is going to be too difficult per se. It might be a simple one. So I decided that I was going to try watercolors just because there's some really fun blends of color. But again, if you're doing acrylic paints, that's totally fine. For supplies, you need something to paint on. So I'm painting on watercolor paper tonight. You can paint on acrylic paper or canvas, whatever you feel like you wish. I have an array of brushes, kind of small, medium, and large, to have a little bit of brush control for some of the objects. And also, you can grab a cup of water to rinse your brushes. I have my watercolor set up here. I have a paper towel. And then we can really just kind of jump right in. You have an option at the beginning of class if you wanted to paint the whole background or not. I'm not going to paint the background tonight. If you're painting with acrylics, if you wanted to do like a light yellow background or a light blue background, you could. You could just pause the video if you're watching this recording and you could paint the background first, a really nice soft light color, and then just rejoin us and restart the video when you're done. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to just kind of embrace the white canvas that I have for some of my primary composition here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk a little bit about the placement of the objects. Now, based on the inspiration, there's some larger flowers down here, and there's a lot less going on here. So there's a couple of big pink flowers here, a smaller pink flower up here, and then there's just some greens that are just lightly kind of dusting this corner. So the top part is fairly white, and the bottom of the canvas from a composition perspective is a little bit more heavy. To get started, no matter what colors you're using, you always want to mix your colors first. So I'm going to do pink flowers. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of red and just find the color that I wish. And I'm going to make it a little lighter as I get going. Now, if you're doing watercolor, you can do wet on wet or wet on dry. Wet on wet means I can take a little bit of the water first and really just kind of like play with the shape of the flower with water. And I'll show you what that looks like. Might as well. So I'm just,
Megan, is your picture pinned or not? Just for
pink.
Pinned. Are you pinned?
I am pinned. Yes,
Okay.
I am. And I'll change it to speaker view to see if that helps, but I am fully pinned. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I can try a little bit of wet on wet and I can show you what that is. And I can do I'm just kind of painting the flower with water. And I'm doing some of the petals and I'm leaving a little bit of white space here and there. And then what you do is you grab a little bit of color and you slowly bring in a little bit of color along the way. So this is wet on wet, doing acrylics. You can play with maybe making the bottom a little bit darker. I'm just going to focus on doing some a little bit darker on the bottom, a little bit lighter on top. Playing with a little bit of the pinks, and I'll do a little bit of petals kind of coming down. It's opening up a little bit. You can play with bringing in different pigments and different colors. So I might bring in a little bit more to make it a little darker on the bottom, a little bit more pigment. Again, you can always play with your pigments on the side, just like you're using acrylics. You want to really choose the colors that you're doing. See, I'm making it a little darker down on the bottoms, and you can just keep adding a little bit of pigment here and there. And I'm just making it a little darker. And you can see I'm really playing with the amount of pigment over here. So if I really want to make this really more rich, I can bring in a little bit more of this darker pigment. And I'm just doing little dabs and dots of color. And it's fun to kind of play with one flower first, because then you can figure out what you like, and then you can kind of duplicate your efforts if you wish. Now for me with watercolor, I'm playing with dabbing in different amounts of pigment to add some darkness here and there. With acrylics, you can paint the light flower first and you can easily bring more of this in. So you can see I'm really just being open-minded and playful with filling this in. And I want to make sure I can see some of these petals. So as you're painting, whether you're using acrylic or the other, one or the other, just keep in mind to bring in different colors. So some lighter colors, some darker colors. And I'm trying to hold some white space just for consideration. So within the flower itself. So I'm just going to let that dry. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to add in, I'm going to play with the shape of the flower. So maybe this flower will kind of point out this way. Yeah, have big petals, maybe kind of coming around. But play with how you use white space. The nice thing is if you don't have a ton of white space, it's okay. You can always go in and use white paint and kind of paint in after. But I'm just adding in a little bit of a pink flower, abstract kind of pink flower over here. And I'm playing with where I add in a little bit more of this pink and red pigment, where I have a little bit less. So this is a kind of abstract, imaginary, like this is what I'm imagining as a flower in this space. And again, I'm playing with the white space. And I'm playing with having some darker pink areas and some lighter pink areas. And you can do this technique with your watercolors. You could do this technique with your paints. It's totally up to you. But one of the themes that we're going to have throughout tonight's class is going to be having significant white space between our objects. So you can see I clearly left white space here. I'm going to do that for each of the objects. So the objects that are going to be in my painting today are leaves, other little flowers, and some like buds. So I have some pink flowers here. I'm going to let this dry. I might add a little bit more pink over here on the edge. Again, you can kind of reflect on what you have for pigments here and there. And while it's wet, you can continue to add one thing or another. And I'm gonna do one more little pink flower up here. You might have a little bit, it might come down around. You could do specific leaves. So I'm doing a little bit of balance with my pink flowers first. When we paint flowers in these classes, I always have you try to do a little bit of, pick one flower and add those colored flowers all first. And then we move to our next flowers in our next area. So for me, I'm going to do a little bit of a pink flower over on this side. And I might add a little orange to these flowers too. So let's see, a little bit of orange. And I add a little bit of orange. And again, you can be playful with how much pigment you use. You might add some kind of orange dots, like this is the center of the flower up here. Maybe the center of the flower is over here. I'm just going to do some kind of fun orange dots just to visually see the center of that flower. And maybe there's just a little bit more orange up here. So I'm being really open-minded and playful on how I'm incorporating color into these flowers. So this one's kind of really open and airy. It's kind of opening up to the left for me. And I'm adding a little bit of extra orange pigment, just little dots. And you can do the same texture with yours. I'm gonna add lots of other things. Again, I'm gonna try to hold, as one fun thing to try tonight, I'm trying to hold that white space around certain things. Now you can let things dry, which is a good thing either way. Now, whether you're painting with acrylics or watercolors, you can let things dry along the way. I'm gonna grab a little bit more pigment, but you can add more. And add more pigment along the way, whether it's dried or not. So add a little bit more there. And you can be playful with your colors too. So I might play with a little bit of a purpley pink, maybe over here in this area. Now with watercolor, you can be playful with how much water you use for your pigment. A little bit of purple and the pink, whether you're using acrylic or watercolor, is really fun, really beautiful accent. Tuck in a little bit of purple detail in some of these flowers, just because I can. Watercolor things are a little bit more permanent, but it's really fun just to kind of allow yourself just to be playful with some of these colors. And you can see I'm using this purple on the edges just to give it a little bit of a shaded tone, which is kind of fun. So you can do the same fun texture with acrylics if you're doing acrylics. Now, if you have any questions while you're watching this, feel free to, write and let me know. I'm happy to help you along the way, especially, if you're trying something new. Don't hesitate to send me a message on Patreon. And Jean, I know you're live with us. So Jean, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to chime in here. But I'm just playing with adding in a little bit of secondary color along the way. And if you're using acrylic, you can choose how much water you want to bring in. I love mixing a little bit of water with acrylics. It's totally up to you on how much you want to add and where. All very optional. But a little bit of a darker color on the edge of a flower is a really cool thing. So I'm going to just let that dry here. I'm just going to come over here and play with this flower over here for a minute, just to kind of just branch it out just a little bit. And I'm going to let that one dry. So we're going to do all of our flowers first, and then we're going to do our greens after. So again, it's okay to let things dry and kind of come back to them. Absolutely fine. If you want to keep working in one area, feel free. I'm going to add just a little bit of edging here on the top of this. Just a little bit of an extra touch. Again, I'm trying to maintain spacing that I'll be adding. But I might do some dark purple flowers. There's some really cute dark purple flowers up here at the top. So I'm gonna let these dry, think about them, and I'm gonna come grab my purple. Now we're gonna mix all of our paint colors over here. So in our classes, we always take our time to find the colors that we like first before we bring the paint over here. So for me, I'm looking for a darker purple than that. So if whether you have acrylics or watercolors, you can I'm adding a little bit of black to this purple just to make it a little bit more rich. Ooh, it's a beautiful darker violet color. It's exactly what I wanted. And I'm just gonna make sure I have enough of it, and enough of it meaning like enough pigment to add more water to it if I want to, or use this as like a really dark pigment color. So, but I like that color. It's nice and dark. I might make it a little bit darker. There we go. And you can see over here, there's a little bit more water. And over here, it's a little darker. And you can use any brushes you like as you paint. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush for some really dainty, delicate, kind of like little cone flowers, kind of like little lilacs. And I'm just going to just slowly just do the tip of these. I'm just doing little kind of dabs. I'm just going to get a little bit and just start to build this out. And I'm going to add another one. Maybe the top of this one just kind of leans over to the left, maybe or to the right, and maybe this one over here. We'll just lean over to the left. You can always come in and you can add as many of these little dotted buds that you wish. You can make this a little bit bigger if you wish to make it a little bit bigger. It's good to add movement or a change of direction in your picture. It makes it look more realistic. Just adding another one here. Then the fun part is you can use light and dark purple colors to add depth to these. So with watercolor, it's a little easier because you use more water for the lighter colors. And you can go back in and add a little bit of a darker touch for some of the shaded elements. So you can see the dark and light purples. It's just based on the watercolors that I'm using. And if I wanted to come in and connect some of these, make it look a little bit more connected, I could, like these little buds, I could come in here with a lighter watercolor purple and just connect some of these, right? You can kind of just do a little bit of a swish. Just kind of a fun way to connect it all. You can do the same thing with acrylics. Same thing. So I'm just being very, and if I wanted to add any little pinks to these, I could just do a little touch of pinks here and there if I wish. So everything matches. That's kind of fun if you wanted to try that. And you could do the same thing with acrylics if you're doing acrylics tonight. I'm just doing a little touch of pinks in some of these wispies. I might add another little one over here. Now our inspirations are there to inspire us with regards to composition, form, and color. You can change any of that along the way. So don't hesitate to just follow your own intuition of what you want to do and why. I think Jean, who's painting with us, Jean painted like beautiful greens, and she's going to do all the flowers on top. She's painting with acrylics tonight, which is really fun. She showed me her sneak peek before class started. But I want to share, just follow your own intuition. The more you take these classes with me, the more you'll feel empowered just to kind of do your own thing. But it's good to get going. If you need a little structure, you can always follow along and do what I'm doing, but always just use colors that you like. That's always an important thing. So I'm just doing a little pinks and a little bit of purples in these, which is just what I'm inspired to do tonight. So I'm focusing on the second flower that I'm doing. And I'm going to let them dry, right? This one's wet. You can see it's a little shiny. Super fun. I'll probably add more pigment to these bottom flowers to make them stand out a little bit more, but at least they're there and the space is being held, right? Now I'm going to add in, let's see, I might add in some like round pink little rosebuds. Some round little flowers as my third flower. But again, you can choose any style flowers that you wish. And again, I'm trying not to let anything touch one another. I'm just doing round little circles. That's like a little rosebud kind of top of a flower. And I'm just doing little circles for right now. And as they dry, I can kind of come in and give them a little bit more depth here and there. So I have a couple over here. I think that's good. I'm going to have primarily green down here on the bottom. I may extend some of these flowers out down here a little bit, just kind of like soften some of these edges. But I'm going to have primarily green leaves down in this space. And the green leaves are going to kind of tuck themselves like up into some of these white spaces and kind of just fluff onto the top. So that's my kind of objective, is to just kind of round out, play with the edges of these flowers. You can see I'm kind of making it a little spritzy with just some really fun, kind of loose, whimsical kind of petals coming off. Just, I'm being playful and being in the moment. Nothing more, nothing less. Sometimes peonies have the edges that are just really kind of like soft and delicate. So maybe this is a peony, who knows? It can be whatever it wants to be. I'm just enjoying the process. It's really why we're here. And you don't have to have clear, defined petals if you don't want to. A lot of this is fairly impressionistic. So I'm gonna try not to take this too seriously. I'm just gonna play with adding a little bit more contrast. So maybe a little more contrast is just like a little bit of darker orange. Kind of tucked in here a little bit towards the center. You could pick and choose what you wish. I like this darker orange, just the center. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. Just add a little bit of this darker orange. So you can figure out if you want your flowers to have like a center point, you can pick a new color to do that. I might do a little bit of that darker orange down here, just define the center of these areas. Maybe I'll just do a couple of small dots. And I'm gonna let this dry. But the nice thing about tonight's composition is that you can kind of just take your time. You can let an area dry, come back to it. The inspiration is fairly loose in color and in form. It's there's a lot of solid colors and there's not a ton of texture. So sometimes in our classes, we have lots of texture, and texture may be like an example of some of these purples. I've added texture. Down here, this is more of like a smooth style like flower. So my leaves, I'm going to keep this fairly smooth. I'm not going to do a ton of texture. I really did my texturing just by only including a little depth. That's really the texture that I've added, and or I may add. And then the other texture is some of this darker texture for like the center of the flowers. But I'll give everyone a little bit of time just to kind of play with flowers themselves, let them dry. With watercolors, you gotta have a little bit of patience. Things take a little longer. I'm trying not to do too much. I'm gonna stop touching it. All right. I'm gonna clean my brush really good. And I'm gonna make some room for green on here. And I went a little crazy here with my palette. I didn't leave myself a ton of room for the green. If you're painting with acrylic tonight, you probably figured out you needed a plate to mix colors on. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. If you've taken my classes before, you probably already had a plate handy. I'm just gonna wipe up some of this yellow or orange rather. And I'm gonna use this area for my greens. How easy that is. Bada bing, bada boom. So as these dry, I'm gonna think about what greens I may want for my flowers. Now, if you're painting with acrylics, again, I want you to mix two colors of greens. I want you to mix a lighter green and I want you to mix a darker green. And I'm gonna do the same thing over here. And we're gonna use those, the lighter greens and darker greens as two shades to really bring our picture to life. I'm gonna use a medium style brush. You're gonna want like a long skinny brush too, but I'm using this medium size. And I'm gonna find and mix my two greens right here. If I need room, I'll wipe this up and move that up there. But I'm going for, I want like a sage green. So I'm gonna start with this Kelly green. To make something more gray, you can add a little bit of black and a little bit of white. If you need to make green, you don't have any green pigments, blue and yellow will make green. So there's a little bit of that kind of sagey, well, it's like a Kelly green color. I'm gonna clean my brush off for a minute. I have a little bit of black up here. I'm gonna make this a little darker. And I'm gonna add a little bit of white to it. So I am adding a little black and a little bit of white, which basically is creating a gray tone, right? If I mix a little bit of black and a little bit of white together on the side, it will give me a gray. So I'm making a gray kind of in the green versus just doing it separately. So I'm cleaning off my brush. My watercolor set did come with white. So I'm going to make this a little lighter. And I'm hoping for there. So this is probably my darker green color. I'm going to clean up my brush and add a little bit more white in to this. And I have white which are kind of cool for a watercolor palette to have that. So this is going to be my darker color. And I could start with this if I want to. Maybe I use the flat edge of this brush to come down and give some stems. And this is actually not too dark at all, so we'll see where this takes us. Maybe I'll just do some leaves. And again, I'm not gonna have them touch. Maybe the top side of the leaf is a little darker. You can play with doing dark and light colors. But I want you to kind of add some of these leaves, add some of these things here and there. So you're gonna have two colors, you're gonna have two leaves. Different colored leaves and different colored stems. So you're having two different colored greens. So take whatever green you start with and just add a little bit of that here and there. Maybe a bit of a leaf here. And try not to let your objects touch one another. Just see if you can do that. And I'm making some of these a little bit darker in some areas. I'm doing an array of colors. So I'm going to put a little bit of that right here. Just took a little bit of that there. Again, these aren't touching, but these are kind of, I'm putting a little bit of the green in between some of these flowers to show that this is tying the whole scene together. So I'm going to do some of this first color green leaves kind of here, there, and everywhere. Maybe I have like a long leaf coming up. So you can fill them in, but add a little bit of a second color to it. And I'm just adding in a little bit of a darker two-tone. I'm just using a little more pigment, basically. And I'm going to look around and say, where else do I want to add this green before I do more of the others? So I know that I want to add more leaves down here. So let's see, maybe I'll just do a couple of leaves. Again, I don't want them to be touching, just playing with that theme for today, just seeing what happens. See, I'm leaving room for more green. Very intentional. Maybe I'll put another one over here. I'm leaving room for a lighter green. So I'm going to do more of like a yellowish kind of lime green as my next color. But you can kind of tuck in a little bit of green leaves, like kind of in and around your flowers if you wanted to. It's always an option. You can always create a stem with some green flowers. You can be playful here, but make sure you leave room for a second kind of leaf color, second area of green. So I have green lots of places. And I'm trying to figure out what I want my second color to be. So as this is drying, I'll come in and add a little bit of more contrast to these in a minute. You can see I'm adding in a little bit of extra contrast. So a little bit of an extra dot here and there of this. Okay. And I'm trying to figure out what I want my second color to be. I think I want it to be a little bit more, I don't want to say pea green because that's not a very nice color, but a little bit more yellowy. So let me see if I can mix that. I have a little bit of a mustard yellow here. Let me grab some more of this mustardy yellow. Ooh, that's a nice color. Well, almost a nice color. I'm gonna grab a little bit more green. See, I'm keeping these separate, but they're nearby. And the cool thing about that is that, and you can do this with acrylics too, is you can kind of blend them if you want to, like as you get going, to kind of find an intermediary color, which is really fun. So I'm gonna grab a little bit more of this and just see where this color takes me. So you can see how these colors are different. As you're mixing your two colors, you can figure out if those are the right tones for you or not. So for me, I want this to be a little lighter and I want it to be a little bit more yellowy. So maybe you try a different yellow. Ooh, that's making it a little bit more lime green. That's kind of fun. So this color could be really nice addition, right? You're looking at it visually as you're making it. Let's try that. I'm adding a little bit more water to this. Again, if you're not using acrylics, you can just mix these with a little bit of water. And with acrylics, again, you can use water if you wish. So then I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to slowly do it a little bit more green foliage. If it's too light with watercolors, you can come in and add more pigments. Totally fine. You don't have to do all leaves. You could do some stems too with like little sticks and branches and things coming off. That's totally fine too. I'm adding in a little bit of this, more of this pigment color. So I'm doing this lighter green. And I'm just gonna slowly, maybe I'll do a little bit of a leaf here coming in. Perfect. So just have fun with it. Use, I think your challenge for today is just to bring in 2 different types of leaf colors. It will really add a lot of character to your picture. And I'm just gonna slowly, maybe these little roses, we'll have this as the underside and just come down. A little bit of greenery. Again, I'm trying not to have things touch, but as a fun example, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. I'm tucking in the secondary green leaf on the top left and right. And I'm going to fill the whole bottom. I may create a third green. I'm not sure yet. Haven't decided. I might grab a little bit of this green and get a little crazy and bring it in as like a secondary color within this green. Just to see what it looks like. Kind of creating a 2-tone effect. So I'm bringing some of my other green into this lime green. Just to kind of make it a little less, make them look less different, more of like a blend colors, which is really fun to consider. And you can fill in this white space however you wish. So you can do little leaves. And again, by holding this white space is kind of a fun opportunity to just see where it goes. If you want to add more flowers, you can add more flowers. I'm going to add some more gray tones, more grayish green tones. So I'm going to mix a little bit more of a grayish green color and I'm going to fill some of that so it's a little more weighted, a little more heavy on the bottom. So in our classes, we typically do first coats of colors, and then we can go in and add more detail. So if you feel like yours just needs more, don't worry, we're going to add more together as a group. And I'm just playing with a darker color green over here. And you can do the same thing on your plate. I just am going for a little bit darker of a color. And your leaves can be nice and soft in color, or they could be really dark. It's totally up to you on how you want to bring in your leaves. The canvas. I'm kind of, again, filling in the bottom. I might bring in some, like, you can bring in yellows into some of these. You can bring in different colored greens. It's really fun, no matter if you're using acrylics or watercolors, to kind of bring secondary colors into some of these objects. So it's just really about just pausing and taking your time along the way and just recognizing what you might want to add and where. For me, I wanted like a little bit darker of a weighted contrast on the bottom. And I'm gonna come in and add a little bit more of that. So with acrylic and watercolors, you kind of let them dry. You look at them, you like walk out of the room, get a cup of tea, kind of come back and evaluate kind of where you're at. And then you can add more layers on top with both mediums, which is really fun. So that's why I'm saying it's just do some basic coats and see kind of where you're at. Because you can come in with smaller brushes and add a little bit more texture here and there. You know, some of these little pink roses that I added in are just little white, little round pink balls. I'm going to add a little bit more texture to those. Um, so just know that have patience with the process and enjoy it. It's really quite fun if you can just allow yourself to slow down and see what happens. It's really fun watching art evolve if you allow it to, right? Without calling it done. It's really fun to see where it can take you. And I'm making a little bit of an extra contrast here. I don't know where this is going to take me, but we're going to give it a shot. A little bit of extra contrast here and there. Maybe tuck in a little bit of extra contrast in between on the edges of some of these leaves. Absolutely up to you on how soft or how, bold you may want to make your paintings. These are all very soft colors primarily. So it's up to you on where you may want to add additional contrast or not. Really different for everyone. I like the extra contrast with some of those greens. I may add a little bit more of like soft green. I'm kind of tucked up here by my purple flowers, but down here I'm filling it in nicely. You can see I've left some of that white space. So it's really just about you pausing and reflecting on your work along the way to figure out what else you want to add and why. Maybe you're done, with certain objects. You may not want to add more of one thing or another. That's absolutely fine. You can make some of those choices. If you like the yellows, you can bring in some more yellowies into these greens. So I'll show you how to do that. I have a little bit of mustard right here. I'm just going to come in with a little bit of mustard and just kind of tiptoe it in. Just the mustard onto some of these leaves, just to add a little bit of that youngness here to some of these. It's kind of fun to bring in a little bit of yellow. So you can figure out what additional colors you may want to bring in and where. But when you take the time and you layer, really magical things can happen when you paint. And sometimes folks may want to keep it more simple. That's fine. Art is a process that is meant for you and for you to play with whatever style you want. There's no expectations. And I always like talking about that in these classes because sometimes people think you have to do one thing or another, and it's not the case. It's something, the reason I do this is to give you an opportunity to know it's okay to try your own thing. It's okay to just see what happens as you paint, bringing colors in different ways, putting them in different places. It allows your brain just to kind of expand in different ways without being so prescribed. Creativity is a magical thing if you allow yourself to get there. I'm going to make a little bit of extra contrast down here at the bottom of this flower. And this is where we're all going at our own pace. We're going to do touch-ups that you need to do. See this shading I'm adding down here at the bottom of this flower. Here it's rounding this flower. It's quite nice. I'm gonna add a little bit of this dark pinkish red right around this, since this is the middle. Just rounding that there. And the edges of this flower are fairly light, so I'm gonna keep that light. Based on the inspiration, but I'm just gonna round some of this over here. You can use your finger with acrylics or watercolors to kind of move things around. You could grab another brush too if you wanted to. If you don't want clear lines, you can just come in. I can move things around with a little water. And even while acrylic is wet, you can come in with a little bit of water on your brush. You can kind of move things around, which is kind of nice. So there's that. And I want to fix the bottom of this flower a little bit. There's something I don't like about it. I might make this petal kind of come out here a little bit more. The edging needs a little bit of adjustment for me. And I'm being really loose and soft on the top of this flower. I'm doing that intentionally. Think about where else you might want to add a little bit of extra contrast. For me, it's on the edge, like outside petals of a flower. I'm adding a little bit of extra contrast. So you can see some depth happening with some of these flowers. If you have too much white space, you can fill it in a little bit to kind of bring your flower together. That's absolutely fine. Kind of looks like a rose a little bit over here. And you can see the centers really start to kind of ground the flower itself. But just find your petals. If you wanted to do any of that shade-like work, you could. And everybody's doing a little bit of something different here or there. So just take your time. I really like some of the darker contrasts. So I might come in, let this dry, come in with a little bit more of these purples or reds. I may come in with some darker purples on some of these little flowers. It's just kind of seeing how the process unfolds. And you can do the same technique with your acrylics. Just let what you're doing dry, move to a different area, come back to it. So it's okay to bop around. Absolutely okay. I'm gonna come in with some dark purple with a smaller brush. A little bit of water and a little bit of dark purple just to see where it takes me with some of these little guys. Now it might go on one way, but it will dry and it will look a little different. So I'm just adding, maybe I'll add a little dark purple to the tops and just see what that looks like first. You can do a little roundedness. It's kind of fun to experiment with adding certain colors in certain places or darker colors or something in certain places. One of the things we're doing more in our classes is talking a little bit about light sources, like where's the light coming from? So where the light's coming from, it's usually lighter. And then on the underside of that object is the shaded area because that's where the light is not hitting. So you can use light and dark colors to really highlight the pigment of certain things, which is kind of fun. I might add There's a couple of these like open-ended, like round little buddies that are like kind of coming up here. They're like little U buddies. Like you could put little flower buds in these maybe. Just adding in little details. You can do little circles, any way that you want to fill in any random space. You can just do little buds, little berries. You could do little red berries. You could do little purple berries. Just come in with a small brush. I'll just tuck a few of these in here or there. Just to see. How this looks. Just tucking in some of these thin lines in different places, which is kind of fun. Maybe I'll just do a couple of these green berries up here. You just want to use a small brush that will give you a little bit more control. Some of these objects. I'll tuck in some of these little lines, just kind of spritzed in between. And if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. This is me just being playful and having fun. But I like demonstrating these oddities of just little designs, my little ideas, because it may inspire you to try it. I also may inspire you to incorporate your own fun little ideas along the way. So I'm just, I have a pretty new brush, and this is a nice fine tip, and you can see I'm just kind of adding a little bit of kind of wispy green like texture in between, just to kind of have it match. And you don't, this is not too light in color. If you don't like this, you certainly don't have to do it, but I'm just being playful as things are drying. Maybe it's long grass. Again, if you don't want to do any of these little long, skinny little lines, you don't have to. So really today's class is you kind of just go at your own pace. You kind of check and see what you're doing. I have some nice contrast I've added to the edge of this pink flower. I like that. You think about where else you want to add additional colors. See, do I need a stem connecting one flower? This poor flower over here doesn't have a stem, so I'm going to add a little bit of a stem over here connecting to the bottom of it. So there's that. I might add a little bit of extra contrast on the underside of this flower over here, just so the bottom is a little bit more shaded looking. And I might use a little bit of this purple just to see how it goes. And this is just a little purple on the underside. Now, with watercolors or acrylics, you can be very loose with your color and your fill, or you can be very specific. I'm being a little more specific with this purple. I'm going to try to blend it in a little bit. Let's see here. So let's try to get a little bit more contrast. And I'm gonna put a little bit of water on my brush to see if I can try to blend it in a little bit. You can use your finger. You can use another wet brush too. There we go. And I'm just playing with some of this color just a little bit. I'm using my finger to kind of blend and smudge it up like it's the underside of the flower. So you can see I'm just being a little playful there. It's okay to try things, right? If I don't like it, I can always just put a little bit of the red back on top. No big deal. I can make the middle here really dark, like it's coming in. So if you want to add depth, just add a little bit of the dark. So I'm just adding a little bit more depth down here at the bottom or in the middle here, just to show that that's the center of the flower. And I could do a little bit of that over here if I wanted to, just to show like this is the bottom of the flower. And I could do a little bit of the dark purple at the bottom here where I have my darker oranges if I wanted to add a little bit of that. So again, it can be really totally up to you on what you want to do. I'll probably add a little bit of dark pink here to show this is the middle. Maybe I'll have a leaf kind of coming up here. Kind of coming in and trimming up and in. And then leaves will kind of just form around. As many of these, this is a whole flower petal maybe here. I'm experimenting. And blend your colors. We can have another layer here just to show that it's multi-layered. Again, it's up to you on how much you want to add and where. I'm just gonna add a little bit of shade here and blend this down. There, so I'm kind of creating just a little bit of fun layering. But most importantly, finding the center of those flowers, adding in a little bit of extra contrast is a really fun thing too. And I'll add a little bit more contrast down to the bottom of this one too. So it's just about going your own pace, figuring out what you want to add and where. So for me, the contrast down here is really important. So I'm using a little bit of this reddish pink color, and I'm going to blend this in a bit. So the more water you add, the more it'll kind of blend in and fade in with everything else. That's really punchy right there, which is really kind of fun. You can see it's really grounding the bottom of the flower here. So I'm just kind of finding the bottom of this flower and figuring out where I really want it to be clear to me. This is the bottom contrast. For me, I like that. Up to you on how much of this, if you want to add to the shaded areas. If you don't have a flower that's sitting in the same composition as mine, figure out, maybe just find the edges of the petals. That's a really easy kind of level 2 tip. It's just maybe on the edge of each of the petals, doing a little bit of a darker line. That's another really easy way of incorporating depth techniques. So there's a little bit of that. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit. There we go. And I might add a little bit more of this red contrast here to some of these petals, just to make it match, just a touch. You can do thin lines, you could do large kind of smudged like areas. It's totally up to you. Maybe I'll try these single little skinny lines on this one. So again, play with what you want to play with. You may be at a point, especially with today's class, to like let this just sit and dry, and for you to just see what happens next with your work. Like that's absolutely fine. And something actually I may do with this is just let it sit here and then come in and add a little bit more of an extra detail or change a color here or there. I'm just doing a little bit of detailed work. And I'm getting pretty close where I may just let it dry and come back to it. Maybe I'll just add a little bit of rose-like detail, maybe a little bit of a soft spiral. to some of these little flowers here. And just with the tip of my brush, you can just do a little spiral for the center and just kind of work your way around to create little petals. It's kind of fun. Little, and those are my little pink dots that I was turning into flowers. So, and I can let those dry, and I can always change those if I want to. Things don't always have to look real, right? Art can be very impressionistic.
Megan, I have to go.
Okay.
This is what I've done so far.
Oh, Jean, it's lovely. Be
So,
sure to send me a picture.
okay.
Um,
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining today. Definitely send me a picture when you're done. I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. All right. So for folks on the line, we've been painting for about an hour now. So I'm going to encourage you. I'll stop our class for today just because I want you to kind of pause and let your work dry. And if you wanted to keep painting, you could, but I'm not really adding anything else new to the inspiration. Some of the major composition areas are, I have some flowers, I have some soft things going up. Consider what other areas of depth that you may want to add. But I hope that you've enjoyed today's class. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. And I am happy to help you with that. My plan is to let this dry and kind of walk away and come back to it to figure out what else I might want to add and where. I may add a little bit of extra dark green contrast using some of this green, but I may let it dry and think about that. And it's okay to walk away from your art and come back to it. So please reach out with any questions. And I do hope you enjoyed today's class. Talk to you all soon.